when I was on vacation, we had our extended family at a lake, brother and sister, mother, father, little nephews. I found myself sitting on the couch with my 5-year-old nephew watching World Championship Wrestling. It's the first time I've watched anything like that in probably 30 years, and I was absolutely amazed at how far that sport has come. I mean, when I was a kid, all we had was these big old beer-bellied rednecks from South Georgia who got to Atlanta and bought a mask and an outfit and developed a big tough-sounding name. We had the Georgia Jawjacker, Bob Armstrong, the Georgia Jawjacker, the Canadian Lumberjack, Joe LeDuc. We had Nature Boy Ric Flair. We had Austin Idol, and I learned all about these moves. I learned about the Texas Death Match and the steel cage match. That scared me, the thought of being in a Texas Death Match or a steel cage match. If you're in there with one of those Russian tag teams, Boris Koloff and all them who had no mercy. Am I talking over your head? I'm sorry. But I was amazed. Now they got women wrestlers, they wear bikinis, and they fight, and they body slam one another just like the men, and they throw one another up in the full suplex. They do pile drivers and Las Vegas leg locks and figure 4 leg locks off the ropes and the turnbuckle. I mean, it's wild, and the wrestlers are much bigger. Steroids are more plentiful. They work out harder. They got longer hair, more tattoos. I mean, it's entertaining, especially if you're a little boy. And so this was new for me in itself. I was seeing all sorts of things I'd never seen before, but there was one thing in particular that was drastically different than anything I ever saw in a wrestling match as a kid. And that is, I had never, until just a month ago, seen a wrestler get so scared that he actually jumped out of the ring and took off running backstage to escape. And I always knew that if I was going to be in one of those wrestling matches, stay in the ring, because if you get out of that ring, all that's going to happen is it's going to get worse. Because instead of body slamming you on that spring mattress deal that they call a ring, you're going down on the hard concrete. You're going to get pile drived into that, and down on the floor, Lord, that's where the steel chairs are. That's where you're likely to get conked over the head with one of those things. Stay in the ring. It was an assumed rule, but this was a very unique situation. Believe it or not, they were terribly unevenly matched. There was this one dude whose name I had to look up and write down for you. His name was Mufafa or Mustasa, and he's a giant monster of a man, and his opponent was this little pipsqueak who almost weighed. The sad thing is they were in the same category because they weighed the same. The difference was Mufasa, or whatever his name was, had all his weight in the arms and shoulders. The little challenger was carrying all of his right here in front of him. I knew it was going to be a disaster. So did the poor little challenger. He was scared. It was so obvious. He was really playing it up, how scared he was as he walked to the ring, trembling, looking around. He got in the ring, and when his giant opponent came out, he might have wrestled 30 seconds before. He darted through the ropes, took off, running down the hall backstage, but the camera went with him. And he walked out, he jumped out into the parking lot looking for somewhere to run, tried the doors on all these vehicles. I mean, this was high drama. Everything's locked, shouting for a cab, but no cabs were in the area. He didn't have a cell phone. He ran back into to the rear of the convention center and saw a porta potty. And you could see the light bulbs come on. That cute little dude, poor little fella, ran into the porta potty, locked the door, and got very quiet. Well, just about the time he got settled, here come Mufasa back there looking for him, hollering, "Where are you? Where are you? Where are you?" Looked everywhere, and for a moment it looked like he wasn't going to find him, but of course he happened to see that porta potty and looked at the audience. "Think he's in there?" "Oh!" And so he started banging on the door. "Open the door!" But the little fella didn't open the door. Would you have opened the door? But that wasn't. I was hoping that was going to be the end. But this big dude tied a big rope around that porta potty, pulled it on its side, and drug it all the way up through the backstage, out in front of the ring, stood it up again, knowing his opponent was in there, the one who jumped out of the ring, the scaredy cat, whom I would have been with. But he stood that thing up, knowing his little pipsqueak opponent was in there. Mufasa took a running start and hit that porta potty like a linebacker. Boom! Bent the thing half in two, slammed it on the ground, and then out flopped this disoriented little wrestler with a big belly and this blue liquid running all over him. All over him. And I thought to myself, that just goes to show, stay in the ring. However bad it might get in that ring, at least you got a referee. Stay in the ring until the match is over. But I hope you know by now that I don't tell you stories like that just to entertain you. I tell you that wrestling match story because of another wrestling match, one that was truly a main event. It was the match of a lifetime. In this corner, weighing probably around 165 pounds, was Jacob, son of Isaac. In this other corner was his big, hairy, wild-looking, orange orangutan-like brother Esau. Had the raw strength and grit and mean as any animal God ever made. These two boys faced off again and again and again from the time they were boys all the way through teenage years up until early adulthood. They were always competing for the favor of the parents, comparing. One was the father's favorite, Esau. Jacob was the mother's favorite. And although Esau was way bigger, tougher, rougher, meaner, merciless, every time they had a match, so to speak, Jacob always managed to rig the match in his favor by using his cunning, scheming mind to work things to his advantage. He always somehow managed to come out on top. And the simple reason he was able to do that was brain over brawn. He was smarter than his brother Esau. At least it appeared that way. Twice he completely tricked, fooled his brother. One of those times he tricked, swindled, lied to his father as well. And through these two first big matches of wit, Jacob won first the blessing of the father. He won the birthright, and all of that put together basically meant he was winning the inheritance of their father, who was a very rich man. This was no small amount. This was not dividing 10 acres 4 ways. This was a big deal. This was valuable. And through his cunning, Jacob won the match. He won the match. But then his brother Esau was ready to fight. And this time, his brother Esau was so mad, however dumb or slow he may have been, he got it now, and he realized what kind of sneaky little brother he had. And he realized, I'm going to take him, and I'm going to hold him up and snap him over my knee. I'm going to slam him against the turnbuckle. You know what? After Esau recognized what a fool his brother had made of him, it was going to actually, literally, you might as well call it a Texas death match. This match, this next fight, this next struggle between those boys wasn't going to be for pride, not for bragging rights. This was to the death. He was going to kill Esau. Esau was going to kill his brother Jacob. So Jacob ran. He jumped out of the ring. And he ran and he ran and he ran. He ran out of the parking lot, out of the whole complex. He ran and he ran 100 miles or more. He ran until he found a place so far away from his family that he was able to make a new start. And that's what he did. And for 20 years, Jacob lived in this new place. And over the course of that 20 years, he continued to use his, tongue-in-cheek now, his spiritual gifts of manipulation, cunning, scheming, and winning at every transaction by any means. Jacob was not one in business who looked for the win-win, which is actually the only good deal, is when it's a good deal for both parties. Jacob was just looking for a win-lose. Every time it worked, it worked. And when something works that well, who's going to stop doing it? As long as it keeps working, as long as any unhealthy, ungodly behavior I have, I act out, that continues working and I keep getting by with it, guess what? I'll probably keep doing it until something happens or someone gets involved and creates a situation where this is far enough. It's time to deal with this. And this time there's no jumping out of the ring. Remember that for yourself. Remember that in relation to anybody in your life. who lives irresponsibly, who lives deceitfully, who uses or abuses other people or you in any way, they'll do it as long as it keeps working. But sooner or later, in every person's life, at least if they're lucky, at least if God is merciful, God Himself will arrange the set of circumstances in such a way that the person who jumped out of the ring so many times, who's never been willing to face reality, who's never truly dealt with his own issues, who's never been willing to honestly make things right with other people and with God, he will continue jumping out of one ring after another, avoiding, running, even if it means hiding out in some nasty porta potty type places. And that time came for Jacob, because after 20 years living with his uncle Laban, a business partner, winning, all the while his uncle losing, and finally Laban got to the point where, hey, I don't like the way this is going. Jacob, this has got to change. I'm going to hold you accountable. And it came to a head over one final transaction that we don't have time to go into. But it was the breaking point for his uncle. And rather than repent, rather than acknowledge he was wrong, rather than own up to the truth about himself, Jacob once again jumped out of the ring. But this time when he jumped out of the ring, there was no longer anywhere good left to run. Because this was a wild and dangerous world they lived in. The way people survived, almost the only way people survived, was by getting themselves into some sort of tribal family unit, becoming part of that unit. And there was safety in numbers. That's why, by the way, in the ancient world and even among American Indian culture, which is a carryover from that, one of the worst things that could happen to a person was for them to be banished. And maybe you hear about people being banished and you think, well, that's not such a bad thing. Just move to a new town, start a new life now. In a world where this is a pre-Christian world, nobody's loving their neighbor as theirself. Nobody's caring about the stranger. The influence of Jesus is still a couple of thousand years away in the future. It was a dog-eat-dog world. And you either live with family or you were on your own and you weren't going to make it long. Especially when you're a 40-year-old man with a couple of wives and a dozen kids, big flocks, almost too many sheep and goats and cattle to count, and you're passing through hostile territory, you're a sitting duck for outlaws. You're not going to make it. So his only hope was to go back to where he'd come. Where else? And what that meant was he was going to have to go right back into that old ring where his brother Esau was waiting. Back to that ring he jumped out of 20 years earlier. The auditorium he'd run from. as his brother screamed death threats. Nowhere to go back but there. And so, as Jacob approached, he began to try his old tricks as best he could. He put together big gift packages. Herds of sheep and goats sent ahead to meet Esau. Gifts signaling, I'm coming in peace. Just want to let you know all is good. What's mine is yours. We're good, me and you. See, I'm giving you gifts. It was a form of manipulation. It had always worked. And so he sent these gifts ahead, these messengers, with all sorts of beautiful, flowery, encouraging, positive talk. Oh, but the word that came back made his heart sink. Chapter 32 of Genesis, beginning in verse 6. After delivering the message, the messengers returned to Jacob and reported, "We met your brother Esau." So far, so good. "We met your brother Esau, and he's already on his way to meet you with an army of 400 men. Jacob was terrified at the news. The King James Version said he was greatly distressed. The old games weren't working, at least not on Esau. And have you ever witnessed it firsthand, secondhand? Have you ever noticed that when all else fails and we can't talk anybody else into doing anything, that's when our attention, that's when we resort to praying. And I say it that way intentionally. Jacob resorted to praying. And I want to read you part of his prayer and watch, and I want you to watch, look and listen to how manipulative his prayer to God is. But don't listen with an aim of seeing, that Jacob, his prayers sure were self-centered and manipulative. Listen to his prayer. Compare it to some of your own prayers, some of my prayers, the promises we make. If only you will do this, God. The ways we remind God, hey, you said in such and such a verse that you're going to do this, this, and this. I'm holding you to it. Just listen. Read along. Chapter 32, verse 9 through 12. Then Jacob prayed, "O God of my grandfather Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord." P.S. between the lines, this is not actually yet his God. Hey, remember my grandfather? Remember my daddy? I mean, we're connected here. You told me return to your own land and relatives. You promised me I will treat you kindly. I'm not worthy of the unfailing love and faithfulness you've shown to me, your servant. When I left home and crossed the Jordan River, I owned nothing but a walking stick. He's referring here to when he first left home 20 years earlier. Owned nothing but a walking stick. And after these 20 years, my household fills 2 large camps. I'm giving you credit for that. Oh Lord, please rescue me from the hand of my brother Esau. I'm afraid that he's coming to attack me along with my wives and children. But you promised me, I will surely treat you kindly and will multiply your descendants. until they become as numerous as the sands along the seashore, too many to count. So, you did promise I'm going to have these descendants, God. So, you got to protect us here, or else your promises are going to be questionable now. God said nothing. Jacob kept thinking. He kept pacing and praying. It must have been a sleepless night, probably the longest night of his life. A night of remembering, of thinking about where he came from, where he started, what kind of person he'd become, and all that had gone into the making of Jacob, the heel grabber. And now, like never before, he wanted so bad to jump out of that ring. But now, his circumstances were such that there was nowhere to run. In fact, this ring just didn't have 2 rubber ropes. This was a steel cage match. It's one he could not get out of. And oftentimes those matches, those struggles that we absolutely cannot get out of are the very struggles God Himself has engineered. Because as long as we can wiggle away from the work He's doing on us, we do. Quick illustration. Some of you have seen my German Shepherd dog, who doesn't believe anybody in our family except my son, who really is not here anymore. He's off at college. Really doesn't believe that we like him. Actually, we spend quite a bit, way too much money on him. Recently bought a pill because the ticks and fleas and chiggers were eating him alive. We felt pitiful. We bought a $60 pill. We fought him for over an hour trying to get that pill down his mouth. We're doing everything in our power. We're literally wrestling with that dog. 2 and 3 of us at a time. But he resisted us. He looked, if nothing else, even if you hold everything else on him, he has this last resort power. Just as the pill is about to be forced between his teeth, he goes, turns that head so quick. Sometimes the only way you can help somebody is to place them in a position they cannot get out of, at least not until you have done the work they so desperately need and just don't recognize. Jacob wanted to get out. He didn't want this pill, brother. He didn't want to be in this ring. Why didn't God just make it all go away? That's what Jacob was really praying for. Make it all go away. God did not. Why? God was the one who arranged the whole thing in the first place. And now Jacob, for the first time in his life, was going to have to actually wrestle with reality. No more avoiding reality. He was going to have to wrestle with the reality of who he'd become. And in doing that, he was ultimately wrestling with God. Are you aware that God, or have you noticed how God and reality will sometimes team up to create scenarios in which he can work. And so with that, Jacob walked in the darkness by the river Jabbok. No street lights, no Q beams, not even a little red dot laser pointer, nothing. And suddenly in the darkness, somebody grabbed him powerfully, yanked him to the ground. His knees hit the gravel hard, and he found himself in the wrestling match of a lifetime. Now I just wonder, have you ever given it thought? The Bible doesn't tell us, it's just worth wondering. Whenever he found himself grabbed in the dark by surprise, considering what he was so afraid of, what he was looking at the next day, wonder what the first thought was that shot through his mind. Who's grabbed me here? My guess would be Esau. Only as they wrestled, he recognized, this is not the hairy brother I remember, and he smells a whole lot better. I don't know who this is, but they wrestled all night long. And way over in the wee hours of the morning, as the dawn began to break, this strange wrestler basically says, hey, the morning's breaking. Match is over. Let go of me, I'll let go of you. We got to split. 32, verse 26. The man said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. That is quite possibly the most powerful line Jacob ever spoke. It's the most important line he ever spoke. Think about this now. Here he is in the wrestling match he's been avoiding his entire life. And now that he's in it, and his opponent is saying, okay, we're done, this master avoider, this running, dodging schemer says, no, we're not going to stop this. In fact, I'm not going to let you go till you bless me. What was that all about? It's that somehow during that night, Jacob began to realize what this was all about. This was no freak, random occurrence. He was wrestling with himself, with reality, with God, just as many of us are. Just as many of us have. And just as many more of us eventually will. And once you get into that wrestling match, and you don't jump out of the ring, and you struggle, and you strain, and you give it your all, you know what happens? Your strength begins to grow. Your character begins to grow. Your quest, your determination to find the truth, that the truth may set you free, grows so strong in you that you actually get to the point where you can honestly pray, God, I don't like this circumstance I'm in, but I pray that you will not let it pass until this has accomplished everything in me it possibly can. Another way of putting it, God, please don't waste this. Most of my life, all it was Everything was about just get me out of the circumstance. Just get me out of the circumstance. But you know you're starting to grow when you find yourself in that circumstance, wrestling and growing, and you say, oh, before you get me out of the circumstance, before I'll leave it myself, I won't let you go till you bless me. And that night he was transformed. That's the way transformation works. It's a process that has repeated itself in my life numerous times. It's a cycle. It's the cycle through which we grow. Recognize that cycle. And the next time you find yourself struggling with something you hate, something scary, something you don't understand, listen, 3 last words. Stay in the ring. Wrestle with all your might and recognize who it is you're actually wrestling with. You think you're wrestling with some person or some problem. The truth is, you're wrestling with God.